I'm Massimo Rosini. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation and Dean of the Institutes, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 121st Distinguished Research Lecture, and thank you for coming today. So first of all, I want to welcome a special guest in today's audience, Leslie Smith. He's a member of the University of Colorado Board of Regents, and thanks for coming. The Distinguished Research Lectureship is among the highest honor the faculty at CU Boulder grant upon a fellow faculty member. And because it's granted by fellow faculty member, it's a very high honor, and we're really proud to host this event as one of the most exciting events hosted by the Research and Innovation Office. And this honor recognizes a faculty member who has demonstrated world-class contribution in teaching, research, and professional leadership. It acknowledges a leader who epitomizes the ultimate positive impact of a truly well-rounded scholar and a professor. So today I'm very pleased to have Professor Shelly Miller as a professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering and in the Environmental Engineering program, who rightfully joins a distinguished list of distinguished research lecturers as the 121st recipient of this award. So before we get going, thank you, Shelly, for joining and for delivering the lecture, and I'd like to give you a round of applause. Thank you. Now I would like to introduce Professor Jana Milford, who's a colleague and friend of Shelly in the Department of Mechanical Engineering, to introduce Shelly and the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to welcome you all and to be able to introduce my friend and colleague, Professor Shelly Miller, for her distinguished research lecture. This event feels a little bit like coming full circle for me, because I was fortunate to get to help mentor Shelly when she came to CU in 1996 as a Chancellor's postdoctoral fellow. Shelly grew up in Southern California. She earned her bachelor's degree in applied math from Harvey Mudd. She holds a master's from the Claremont Graduate School and a master's and PhD in environmental engineering from the University of California at Berkeley. Shelly was an outstanding postdoctoral fellow. She came with her own well-focused research agenda and needed little more from me than a few introductions around campus to be able to successfully launch that agenda. And she was hired into a faculty position in mechanical engineering in 1998. Shelly's a valued faculty member and leader in the mechanical engineering department and in the environmental engineering program, where she's developed courses on indoor air quality and air pollution control, and focused her committee service on graduate education and faculty development. Across campus, Shelly's been a leader for faculty diversity, equity, and inclusion, including serving as Director of Professional Development in the Office of Faculty Affairs. And during the pandemic, Shelly generously contributed her expertise and time to our community's health as a member of CU Boulder's Pandemic Steering Committee. Among many other professional service contributions, Shelly currently serves as Associate Editor for Environmental Science and Technology, which is one of the leading journals in our field. Shelly's an internationally recognized leader in the fields of indoor air quality and control of airborne infectious disease agents. And early in the pandemic, Shelly's expertise positioned her to contribute a breakthrough insight about COVID transmission to the international public health community. So in reply to my inquiry about her contribution on this topic, our chemistry colleague, Joost de Gouw, wrote, "An important scientific contribution from Shelly was her analysis of the efficient COVID transmission that occurred during a choir rehearsal in the Seattle area. Shelly's understanding of indoor air pollution and airborne pathogens were instrumental in getting this analysis published early on in the pandemic. This showed that COVID-19 was transmitted via an airborne pathway with enormous consequences for public health." In my view, three vital characteristics have long distinguished Shelly's work. First, her work focuses on developing solutions to public health problems through measures to mitigate exposures to wildfire smoke, air pollution, and infectious disease agents. Second, Shelly was years ahead of most of us in partnering with disadvantaged communities to pursue environmental and health equity. And lastly, Shelly takes a uniquely holistic approach to her work on public health, building collaborations and considering multiple dimensions of well-being. When I asked her about the secrets to Shelly's success, Shelly's collaborator, Elizabeth Carlton at the University of Colorado at Denver, wrote, "Shelly brings a collaborative spirit. She truly values and seeks the input and expertise of others, from faculty to grad students. I think this makes for good science and is quite motivating. She fosters the idea that we all have something to bring to the team." Indeed, Shelly's postdocs and students find in her a generous mentor and a remarkable role model. Shelly's former PhD student, Mohammed Al-Tarkawi, wrote in an email, "I'm beyond lucky to have had Professor Miller as an advisor for 8 years for both master's and PhD. She's always available and supportive. I've learned from her that our mission as engineers is to make a difference, and our success in this mission is based on clarity of purpose, growth mindset, and courage." Shelly's current master's student, Dulce Gonzalez Beltran, wrote, "I've been working under Professor Miller for about 1.5 years now. And during that time, I've learned the importance and art of communication and building relationships with the communities that we work in. As an engineer, I enjoyed telling stories with the results from my analyses, and now, after working with Shelly, my passion to share these stories and to help communities better their environment and in turn their health has flourished." And finally, Nick Clements, who worked with Shelly as an undergrad, a graduate student, and a postdoc, wrote, "Shelly taught me to approach research by casting a wide net. We can't only think about outdoor air quality, indoor air quality, bioaerosols, pathogen exposure, etc., alone, but instead it's best to have a breadth of experiences from which you can find new ways to improve people's lives through research." So I'll close by saying how fortunate I feel to have had Shelly as a friend and colleague all these years. Her professional contributions have literally kept us all healthier and have provided valuable insights and expanded opportunities for her colleagues and students at CU. And last but not least, she's been a great friend. With that, I give you Professor Shelly Miller.
Thank you, Jana. That was a wonderful, generous introduction. I really appreciate that. And I'm just going to take a moment and look around at all my favorite people. Thank you for showing up. You are here. Yes, back row. Esther. No, really, thank you for this incredible opportunity. I want to share some of the lessons I'm still learning on the path to improving urban air quality and public health. The meteorological conditions responsible for London's killer smog started on Thursday, December 4, 1952. A high-pressure weather system spread across the British Isles. The system brought with it light variable winds, dry air, and frigid temperatures. During the night, the valley experienced a temperature inversion. Air near the ground grew colder, and soon it was trapped beneath a lid of warmer air above. London found itself becalmed, and it remained so for 4 days and 4 nights. Early Friday morning, when everyone woke, tons of smoke from millions of domestic chimneys hurled upwards into the cold, motionless, foggy air. Huge power stations added still more tons of coal smoke and sulfur oxides to the atmosphere. Cars, trucks, buses, and a variety of factories and industrial plants all contributed to their pollutants. In a short time, the fog had become massively contaminated with a mixture of smoke, soot, carbon particles, and gaseous waste. Now yellow, then amber, and then black. The great killer smog held London in its grip, And by early evening, only 12 hours after its onset, the first of the city's inhabitants began to die. By some estimates, the smog killed 12,000 people. Here's the estimate of the acute deaths during that week of about 4,000, with the rise in smoke, rise in sulfur dioxide, and rise in deaths. We even estimate that more than 150,000 others were hospitalized. This short excerpt from William Wise's Killer Smog introduces the three main factors responsible for air pollution: meteorology, emissions, transport and transformation leading to adverse health effects. And I always start my air pollution class with reading this excerpt because it tells my students everything they need to know. And then I say, okay, that's it, go home. Because this is it, right? Meteorology, emissions, transport and transformation, adverse health effects. Most of my work has focused on particles. Now, the Great Smog was filled with gases and particles, but I can only do so much. So I focus on particles. The most important thing to know about particles is their size. That's all you need to know about particles, is how big they are. Coarse particles are generated by mechanical processes like road and tire wear, and they are about PM10, 10 microns in diameter. That's this big black one. That's coarse particles mechanically generated. Fine particles are generated by combustion, your cars, your power plants. And this is PM 2.5, this second black one, in between by the red blood cell. And finally, viruses are nanometer in size range. And here's the COVID-19 virus. We also have ultrafine particles that are about this same size. And they can pass the blood-brain barrier and get into all of your organs, and we're still studying the health effects of ultrafine particles to this date. One of the most important air pollution studies was published in 1993, the 6-city study. They investigated the relationship between different air pollutants like gaseous pollutants, ozone, and sulfur dioxide, and particles like sulfate PM, PM 2.5, or total PM. And they found that people living in the most polluted city, so in this study it was Steubenville, Ohio, were 26% more likely to die than those in the least polluted city of Portage, Wisconsin. This suggested for the first time an association between particulate air pollution and higher death rates in urban areas. And unfortunately, current research shows that there's no safe level of PM 2.5, and that even below the EPA standards, which are designed to protect public health, there are still death and illness impacts from breathing this pollutant. So here's a list of the short and long-term health effects of air pollution. Okay, the short term, we get a headache, you're coughing, skin irritation. Long-term, cardiovascular disease, lung cancer, respiratory diseases, impacts on liver, et cetera. The EPA sets urban air quality standards to protect public health, especially the most sensitive, children and elderly population. And so based on the current health effects information, we know that acute 24-hour PM 2.5 standard is 35 micrograms per cubic meter, and the long-term annual average is 12 micrograms per cubic meter. So I'll be throwing around 12, 35, often in the talk, so make sure you keep it straight. Which one is short term? 35, right. Well, let's talk a little bit about Colorado. Over the past few decades, the annual PM 2.5 levels have remained below the EPA's annual average air quality standard of 12. So that's a remarkable accomplishment. And we have a pretty reasonable PM 2.5 annual average concentrations. However, if we look at the short-term levels, we see that we can pass the 35. And in 2021, for example, in Longmont, we measured 68 as a maximum 24-hour concentration of PM 2.5. I just want to compare Colorado to the rest of the United States for the short-term 24-hour maximum concentrations. And we can see that the west part of the United States is a little bit higher than the east, but it's still below 50 micrograms per cubic meter. Denver became known for its problematic air pollution more than a century ago. Its location at the foot of the Rocky Mountains makes it prone to temperature inversions, similar to what happened in London's great killer smog. By the mid-1950s, health officials really became concerned about air quality, and Denver logged 1,200 pollution complaints in 1956 about the smoke in the air. Denver's looming air pollution came known as the brown cloud. Combustion processes, cars, power plants, account for over 80% of this brown cloud. The brown cloud peaked in the 1970s and 80s when EPA air quality standards were violated nearly 200 days a year. All right, time to wake up and pull out your smartphones. We're going to do a little research. So first of all, I'm going to give you a choice. You can go to the airnow.gov website, or you can go to the waqi.info website. Now, the difference is airnow.gov shows you air quality on the US, and it's reported by EPA-validated monitoring stations. So this is US and EPA-validated monitoring. WAQI is a crowdsourced site relying on all sorts of monitors around the globe. So if you're going to take a trip to, say, Barcelona, or you're going to go to Washington, D.C., you might want to check out the air pollution before you go, and this is how you do that. So I am going to ask for a few volunteers to tell me what sorts of air pollution you see today and around the world. So raise your hand, Renee Leiden. Tell us your air pollutions.
Well, in Barcelona, it's like good to moderate, and like the downtown area.
That's amazing. Usually it's terribly polluted in Barcelona. Well, good. Good for us. Actually, it's probably nighttime there, so that's probably why. What else? What else have we found out there? Yes?
In Western Greenland, it's a 1.
It's a 1. Fantastic. So that means it's so good. Yeah, that's great. Does anyone see any like reds or unhealthy around the world? Or yes, Dr. Vance.
In Jakarta, it's 160.
160. So in Jakarta, this is an air quality index, 160, very unhealthy. All right, one more. What do we got? Sophie.
In Glasgow or near Glasgow, it's 152.
Okay, so it is also unhealthy. Yeah. All right, so now you have no excuse for not figuring out what the air pollution is wherever you go. Okay, let's take a break now from air pollution, and I want to share a little bit more about me. You heard from Jan, I grew up in Southern California. The smog was so bad in Pasadena, where my father was attending medical school, that in the summer when the windows were open, the smog would waft into the classroom and cloud the chalkboard so that he couldn't see what the teacher was writing. When I was in high school, we often were sent home because of high ozone days. When I graduated from Loma Linda Academy in 1982, there were over 150 unhealthy days a year. But look at 2021. We've got 1, right? This is a true testament to sound policy and engineering solutions because we have more people than ever in Southern California and more vehicle miles traveled, right? My high school algebra teacher asked me in pre-calc class, what was I going to study in college? Well, I don't really know. So he suggested mathematics. Okay, so I went off to Harvey Mudd College. I took that advice, and I got my math degree from Harvey Mudd. And Professor Borelli was one of my teachers. And thankfully, he wrote me a recommendation letter to go to grad school at Berkeley. When I got to Berkeley, I took lots of different classes, and I just couldn't find the right thing. But then I got to Professor Nazaroff's Fundamentals of Environmental Engineering. And that class blew me away, and I thought, this is my true passion for solving environmental problems using engineering solutions and mathematics. It was perfect. So what I really want to highlight from this slide is that it's who really knows you and that you really know that will really help you along the way. So think about, who's been there for you, and also who are you there for? And this is an important lesson in my life that I wanted to share. I decided I wanted to be a professor when I grew up after my failure analysis class taught by the only female professor I had had in my entire academic career, and that was Professor Jane Myrie. She was really hardworking, super smart, had great style, and drove a Jaguar. I thought, okay, that's me. Research shows that undergraduates are more likely to major in a field if they have an inspiring and caring faculty member in their field. And I really hope that I've been that for many of my students. And we need more portrayals of women as competent professionals, engaged community members, and happy partners. I want to graciously thank so many that inspired me, and especially highlight Tracy Thatcher, my office mate at Berkeley, who I never could have finished my PhD without. I want to thank Jana Milford, my colleague who wrote with me my first grant, many of my first papers, and advocated for me to join CU as the Chancellor's Fellow and then a faculty member. And my mom, who got her PhD when I was in high school, and a fierce advocate for equity and justice her whole life. And female leaders like Suzanne Saled, who's gratefully here today. I worked with her in the Office of Faculty Affairs, and I had the privilege of learning so much about leadership from her. All right, enough about me. Let's shift back to science and talk about airborne infectious disease control. One of my very first PhD papers in 1996 was on tuberculosis. And this is a graph of somebody with tuberculosis, and this inflamed lung is the infection of mycobacteria in the lung. In the 90s, we had a huge resurgence of tuberculosis because of the multi-drug resistant strains. In fact, in 2011, there was a drug-resistant case at a Denver high school. And just last week, there was another tuberculosis case at a high school in Denver. So it's still around. But most of the deaths and morbidity are in the developing and middle-income countries, where we lost 1.6 million people last year to tuberculosis. It's a leading infectious disease, and it's spread from person to person through inhalation of airborne particles containing mycobacteria when you sing, cough, or speak. Now, where have you heard that before? So I studied filtration, I studied germicidal ultraviolet light, and these were really important technologies to help healthcare facilities and other really high-risk locations like jails, homeless shelters, maybe even some childcare centers from a lot of disease spread, because we can't just take care of it with policy. So sometimes engineering can really help. And I wanted to focus just on one aspect, air cleaners. But first, we're going to talk about, again, how infectious aerosol is spread. So now this graphic comes from a colleague who published a recent paper during the COVID pandemic, but it's still the same principles of what we knew back in the 90s and way before that about tuberculosis, where we have the PM2.5 and the PM10 particles being generated as you cough and sneeze. And the closer you get to somebody who's infected, the more particles you will possibly breathe in. And as you move farther away, you can breathe less particles. But they still stay afloat. Even a particle as big as 100 microns, which is the thickness of your hair, can still stay afloat depending on the air currents and how the air is mixing in the space. So, air cleaners. One of my first papers was on testing these for mitigating tuberculosis. I also did some really fun work with my colleague Mark Hernandez, looking at air cleaners to mitigate infections and airborne bacteria in the Boulder Mapleton therapy pool facility. Filters are really efficient, and I'm a huge fan. All right, we have a fan and a filter, and the filter, oh, that was not meant to be. But, oh well. All right, so we have this filter, and it's like, it's just like a mashed together fibers that collect particles as you draw the particle-laden air through the filter, and they'll collect in this filter for you. This is the efficiency of how filters work. All right, so the small particles get removed here through diffusion. The large particles get removed through impaction and interception, and we have this little dip here at 0.3 microns. But a HEPA filter, which is what we always recommend you buy for your home, is 99% efficient at 0.3 microns. So it's almost 100% efficient all across the size range. But check this out. This is exactly how your lung works. All right, your small particles get deposited in the tracheobronchial region and in your pulmonary airways, and in your head airways, the large particles get collected. And we have a minimum, again, at 0.3 microns. So thinking of your lung as a filter, it's exactly what's happening when you breathe air pollution. This student project was really fun. I asked my student to build a Corsi Rosenthal box, which is a $40 air cleaner where you can get all the supplies at McGuckins. You need duct tape, MERV 13 filters, and a box fan. You tape it all together, and you have a really efficient air cleaner for $40, right? So what I had her do was build it, operate it in her apartment, and cook some meals. And let me show you the data. So there's her stir fry. This is the AirThinks consumer grade monitor we used, and this is the data that she collected. So the red is the particle concentration, the yellow is formaldehyde, and the green is the air quality index. At these 3 time points, she cooked her chicken. The PM2.5 peaks at 178 micrograms per cubic meter. Now this is where we want to compare it to 35, 24-hour average. Again, she cooks 77, 68. Now, the formaldehyde also peaks during cooking, which is a result of the chemistry that happens when you cook carbon-based food, right? Nice to know, though, 0.1 milligrams per cubic meter is the WHO guideline for formaldehyde, so it's not getting too high. But check out what happens with the air cleaner. When she cooks 2 more times, the particles only increase to 15 and 13. And so you've got a 90% reduction in her small apartment from using this air cleaner. This graphic is an open door. And one of the life lessons I've learned is that lots of doors open, and you just have to be watching for which door opens for you, and you really should go through it. Now, sometimes halfway through it slams in your face, so you turn around and try the next one. But really, the open door is the key for finding new adventures. And fast forward 20 years from all this fun research, the COVID pandemic needs me, and I have to run through that open door, right? So what happens? I am going to take us back a little bit to this fairly traumatic time in many of our lives, so hang on. It can bring up a lot of emotions because so much happened to all of us, right? But I'm thinking back in December 2019 when you're starting to hear about this mysterious flu-like illness in China. And then they lock Wuhan down, and you're thinking, that's pretty drastic. And then the first case shows up in New York City, and it's March. And I'm like, what is going on? Like the rest of us, right? What do we do? How do we keep from getting sick? I read about this case in New York City. And this sentence, which I don't know if any of you caught, but I was just so drawn to it. It said, also infected was a neighbor who drove our butts to a doctor's office when he feared he might have the disease. Well, that neighbor got COVID, all right? And the CDC had been telling us, it's spread by touching contaminated surfaces. And I thought, how on earth would you drive your neighbor to the hospital and get COVID? Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So I kept thinking, this is not making any sense. But meanwhile, I'm still washing my groceries, and I'm putting my packages out, you know? And we're thinking, what is going on? But as Jana alluded to, the Skagit Valley coral outbreak happened in March. And my colleagues and I, particularly Jose Jimenez, who called me and was like, did you see that? This is the key. We were all shocked. And I'll talk a little bit more about this, but over 2.5 hours, 80% of the choir got sick and 2 people died. It was tragic. So right after that, my colleagues who work in this field, they were aerosol scientists, environmental health physicians, ventilation experts, microbiologists, virologists. We all start emailing each other from all around the world, and we're like, this is airborne. Nobody knows it's airborne but us. We have to tell somebody. And we email the WHO. We need to meet you. We need to tell you. Please listen to us. And here is the email. I'm writing on behalf of a group of scientists from around the world who've worked on characteristics of droplets expired by humans, and we asked the World Health Organization to consider a recommendation to protect against airborne disease spread. All right? Well, we weren't infectious disease docs, and they didn't know who we are, and they're like, just go away. We didn't go away. We did our own work, but finally in May 2021, over a year later, the CDC acknowledged airborne transmission, and over a year and a half later, the WHO acknowledges airborne transmission. And we describe all of this in a paper that recently came out in Clinical Infectious Diseases because we don't want this to happen again, right? We really need to know this stuff sooner before millions of people die. I'd like to highlight some of my contributions to the COVID pandemic, some of the most favorite things I did. So here is the Skagit Valley coral outbreak. We developed a model. I worked very closely with my international science colleagues, and this is readily available, this spreadsheet on how you do this. Jose Jimenez put it together, and you can run your own model calculations if you'd like, but it's based on our work in this paper. The choir rehearsed for 2.5 hours, and 80% got infected. Okay, well now we know ventilation, air cleaning, masks, and shortening the time indoors all work. So what happens if you put more ventilation in, or you use an air cleaner, or you shorten your rehearsal, or you wear a mask? You reduce the probability of being affected to 50%. That's not good enough. So we decided to recommend a layered approach. You can do all of that, and you'll get your risk below 10%. And you may have heard that. That's why we have ventilation. That's why we have masks. That's why we have air cleaners. Just everywhere you can possibly need it if you use it, if you need it. I also made this really fun video to teach kids in schools about how airborne diseases are transmitted. And I did this video with my daughter, Renee Leiden, who was 14 at the time, and my wonderful colleague, Marina Vance, who, so if you haven't seen the video, check it out. I also put together an air cleaner tool with my colleagues at Harvard, Joe Allen, and it's readily available for you to size an air cleaner for your home. Now, don't just go out to Target and buy an air cleaner and stick it in your living room, because it may not work, because it may not be the right size. This room probably would need 5 air cleaners to clean it appropriately. But your bedroom probably needs just 1. And so what you do with this is you enter the size of your space, how much ventilation you have, what air cleaning you're thinking about, and it will tell you whether it's a good choice or not, all right? And we use this at Boulder High School to size air cleaners for the classroom, and Horizons K-8 for their classrooms as well, and that's where my kids were going to school. So I called them up, I'm like, please use my air cleaner tool. And then summer 2020, James Weaver of the National Federation of State High School Associations and Dr. Mark Speed of the College Band Directors called me and said, we need you, can you help us save music? And I was like, good thing I picked up the phone. Sure, I will help. So we developed a pretty comprehensive approach to looking at how on earth could aerosols be spread. We know it's spread by singing. What about when you play the trumpet or the clarinet or you're a theater performer? What happens? So I'm just going to share a little bit of the work we did. And this is the flow visualization that we did in the project. And luckily, the professor is here who did this, Jean Hertzberg. We have a beautiful singer from CE's music program. And here you can see the flow being generated from her singing coming out. This is the airflow with carrying virus. Then we put a mask on. And some air is coming out the top and the bottom, but not nearly as much out through the jet of the mouth. The PhD student, Taya Stockman, who ran this study, is a clarinet player, and she is here today. Wave your hand, Taya. This is a huge contribution on her part. We studied lots of different instruments, but this is the clarinet data, where if you play a clarinet, you have a really sharp peak of particles coming out the end of your clarinet. Okay, they possibly could be carrying virus. So then we mask the clarinet, and you get basically nothing come out of your clarinet. And then again, you play, and you get a peak, and you wear a mask, and you don't get a peak. We spent 3 months in the lab, many hours, trying to come up with a plan to keep music open, because if we didn't have anything by fall of 2020, everything was going to be shut down. These were our recommendations, and we are happy to say that we had no reported transmissions in the classrooms of all of the programs who followed our recommendations. We mask everything, we distance, we play outdoors if we can, we reduce the time indoors, we ventilate, we use air cleaners. And this is actually a picture of a college band practicing at one of my friends' daughter's school. COVID was a wicked problem, all right? And we have a lot of wicked problems to solve. We've got climate change, number one. It's tough to do a wicked problem without an incredible epic team, all right? So we need epic teams, and that's what I really love to do in my work, is to not be the only one who knows everything, but I know a little bit, and then I work with all of these teammates to help me figure out the problem. But when we solve a wicked problem, we need to go into it with a precautionary principle. And I want you to try to think of everything with a precautionary principle. We don't do that in the United States. We like to develop toxic chemicals and throw them out there in the marketplace and go, knock yourselves out, use this in your house. And then like 15 years later, you realize it gives you, cancer. So let's not do that anymore. Europe is a little bit better at that, I have to say. But the precautionary principle is like, somebody says, there's no danger here, and you say, well, prove it. Okay, now when the WHO said it's not airborne, we wanted to say, well, prove it, that it's not caused by touching a surface. We never saw any transmission data from them showing it could be. But yet, it's not airborne. So we got to focus on climate change now. We have to keep the main thing the main thing. This is another life lesson for me. Making priorities, making choices, what's your main thing? Well, my main thing for 2 years was COVID, right? But I can only talk about ventilation and filtration so much. And I'm hoping you got it by now. So I decided to move on to my next main thing, right? And that was making a difference in disproportionately impacted communities. I had been doing this work before COVID, and I wanted to return. So we're going to spend a little bit of time now talking about this. And I have a handful more studies to share with you. This is Globeville. It's at the intersection of I-25 and I-70. Sometimes you drive by there and you smell an odor. Much of the odor comes from all of these industries around Globeville. I want to highlight one in particular, Koppers Industries. It's a wood treatment facility. There's also the Puna Pet Care, and this is the #1 complaint in Denver for air industry odors. Residents in Globeville contacted a nonprofit who then contacted me. And I said, well, I'm teaching air pollution control engineering. Let's work on this problem together. So we also wrote an environmental justice grant to get a little bit of money to do some sampling and analysis. So this is Bobby. And every time he would smell this odor in his backyard, he would run outside and he'd collect samples for us. And we got a few samples and we sent them off to a lab. We identified 6 pollutants that tended to show up at higher concentrations in odor samples than background samples. And these are the 6 chemicals. So you can see we have all these odor samples, and we have hexane, heptane, benzene, toluene, MP-xylene, and naphthalene, volatile organic compounds, except naphthalene is a SVOC. The problem is, well, benzene, toluene, and xylene, they're all carcinogens, but they also come from traffic, gasoline. So they don't really tell us too much about industrial odors. However, naphthalene, this was a shock. And we thought, what is the source of naphthalene? Well, using meteorological data and emissions inventories, we figured out that it was the Koppers wood treatment facility that's treating wood ties with asphalt and creosote to make them more waterproof. But it's also releasing naphthalene into the atmosphere. It's not covered, it's not controlled. They're below the regulation to do that. And so it's impacting the community. Well, how do we draw more attention to this other than telling people this is here? So I decided not to focus on health effects. Very difficult to prove health effects with odors, because you can smell an odor at a level that's lower than I can measure with my equipment, and you will also feel the health effects, but I can't measure it. So it's it's complicated. So what we decided to do was look at how happy you were if you were living in a place with odors. People are happier and more satisfied with life when air is fresh and there are no odors. And okay, I know this kind of makes sense, but we need data so that we can make evidence-based decisions when we make policy, right? So my student who Jana mentioned, Mohammed El-Takarwe, who is a professor in Libya, by the way, did his work here and went back to educate in Libya. It's fantastic. He did this, talked to 300 people, recruited on social media, and they filled out a questionnaire, and they said, I am happier, and I perceive the odor to be very fresh. Now, this is an odds ratio, so the odds are very high that you're happier and that the odor is fresh. Similarly, the satisfaction data shows that you're less satisfied when your perceived odor is strong, but the odor acceptability is high, then you're more satisfied. So these are all statistically significant results showing that well-being is associated with industrial odors. We also developed an app where you could report your odors. And you could tell me where you were, and you could even officially report to Denver. Now, out of these 81 reports of pet food, we were able to identify that 24 reports came from northeast downtown, and also the wind always blew from the northeast towards northeast downtown when that odor was happening. Now, this data evidence supported Denver's decision to change their odor ordinance. No longer did they do this silly thing where they would send out a person who would sniff in a little device and never find an odor. Now, if you live in Denver and you smell an odor, you call Denver and you say, I smell an odor. And if a handful of people report in a month, then Denver goes and asks this industry what they're doing and will investigate. So that was a great success for Denver. Unfortunately, most of these facilities are not actually in Denver. They're in the neighboring community, so it makes the problem a little difficult. Well, we decided to look at the relationship between respiratory health and your home characteristics. So we call this the CHEER study, Colorado Home Energy Efficiency and Respiratory Health Study. So this is Pratik, my student, doing a blower door test. Have any of you had a blower door test done in your home? Yeah, okay. You do it to figure out if your home is energy efficient. And if it's tight, then you have a low air exchange rate. And if it's leaky, you lose all of the heat from your house, and you pay more on energy, and you have a high air exchange rate. And then we also had a team doing respiratory health measures. And I worked with Beth Carlton on this project, and Elizabeth Root, who used to be here, and I was at Ohio State. And we have all this front range data. We went to over 200 homes. Pratik went to every home and did a blower door test in every home. Took him 3 years. And we did 300 respiratory tests. And what we found out was pretty surprising, but not really, but at least we have data for it. What we showed is that as your home gets leakier, so your exchange rate goes up, your reported respiratory symptoms also go up. Why? Well, to me, what that's saying is the outdoor air is coming into your home, and it's polluted, and it's causing respiratory health effects. That was my hypothesis. So we stratified the data to look at whether you lived closer to a major roadway or farther from a major roadway. When you live close to a major roadway, your data becomes statistically significantly higher respiratory symptoms when you have a leakier home. Now, mind you, these are disproportionately impacted communities, smaller homes, lots of leaky homes. And so what I'm saying is that if you live near an air pollution source, it will come into your home and it will make you sicker. And so this is why we need to focus on our homes and also the outdoor sources. We looked at wildfire smoke in this study, and this is intuitive, but when a wildfire plume wafts over Colorado, it brings a bunch of PM 2.5 in our community. And when that happens, we see the black carbon and the PM 2.5 increasing from no plume to high plume coverage, the outdoor numbers go up and the indoor numbers go up. So again, more evidence that that wildfire smoke is coming into your house. But as you know, I love air cleaners, and I'm going to show you that that's how you mitigate the wildfire smoke in your home. You don't just go into your house and shut the windows up and hope for the best, because 50% to 20% reduction in PM 2.5 from wildfires, this is snaking wildfire in 2002, that's not enough, all right? You'll get a lot of PM 2.5 in your home just closing the windows. Well, when we heard the public announcement on the radio from CDPHE, Jana and I, they were saying, okay, wildfire season, everyone go home and close your windows. We thought, that's not right. So luckily, CDPHE funded us to show that really you should use an air cleaner. In some of these homes that are big enough, we use 3 air cleaners in each home, and we could reduce the PM 2.5 by upwards of 80%. So you can protect your health with these air cleaners while wildfires are happening. My last topic is the project we're working on right now, and it is so much fun, and it's really an important project. And that's why I shouted out to Esther, because she's my collaborator on this project. And Shiv Mishra as well is my team member. So this is our team. I'm the environmental engineering lead. Shiv is our computer science, and Esther is our social science. It's a collaboration between CU Denver and CU Boulder. And this is a picture of our team, fearlessly led by Nick Clements, Ania Khalili, Sophie, Dulce. We have a lot of team members here, and Sam on this team. This is us at a summer camp that we throw every year for the youth. So these are the cities that we're studying. And the last 5 years, they were impacted by the I-70 construction. Any of you noticed the I-70 was being completely torn down and retrofitted? Well, so did the people living there. And it really impacted the way they got around in the community. It impacted their air quality, noise. Can you imagine all those construction vehicles driving through your neighborhood night and day? And these homes are right next to the freeway. So we wanted to give them the opportunity to provide data and provide evidence that this is really impacting my community. Don't just walk into my community and say, I'm going to fix it. It's really impacting it, and here's what happens. This is one video of the construction. I like this video. You can see all the dust flying out from this being brought down. But you can also see the mitigation. So over here, they're spraying water, and they're spraying mist, and a mitigation approach to keep the particles from spreading further. And it is a good approach. There's the pet food. Our citizen scientists carry these personal Atmo tubes, and they're under $200 each. And they work very well. We've shown with data that they report very, very close to PM 2.5 levels. This is what you see on your smartphone. And today it tells us that it's a 94. Well, a 94 is a good score. It's opposite of the air quality index, in case you remember. The air quality index, a high number, was a bad score, so we can't get confused by that. But this is what you see on your smartphone. And I have to tell you that 71% of participants said the main benefit of carrying this was building awareness of air pollution. 50% of the participants adopted exposure mitigation strategies. They decided, and they were also able to identify sources of air pollution, like cleaning products and smoking. There was even a comment that they didn't realize that smoking marijuana would generate air pollution because it was better than cigarettes. I'm like, okay. Running humidifiers, air cleaners, house fans, cleaning ducts, they all realized, like, this actually helps. And 40% of the participants adopted protective behaviors, such as going outside when the outdoor air was better than indoors. And we got these wonderful results from focus groups that our social science team did with our participants. The data I have here is from 2 of our Atmo tube users. And I pulled this data out because I want you to tell me which one has better exposure concentrations. Atmo tube 16 or 48? Who votes 16? Who votes 48? Who's not sure what I'm talking about? So Atmo tube user 16 is measuring her PM 2.5, here or him 2.5 here, all the days of March 12 through March 18. It's pretty good. It's below 5, right? We want it to be below 35. And then here at between the 13 and the 15 here, probably there's a big air pollution episode, right? Gets up to 30. That's good. That's the one I would vote for. This Atmo tube user, 48, I mean, she's been in our participating all 4 cohorts, always super high, skyrocket. I don't know what is going on in that house or where they're working or where they're living, but we're going to find out, Ania. So here, this peak is 700, and this peak is 100. And you know, it's great to be able to identify these conditions that we can then help the person mitigate their exposure. Our computer science team developed an app that we can report symptoms and well-being every day for 30 days, 4 times over 2 years. And here's a picture of the app if you feel like downloading it. But you tell me where you are, and you tell me how you're feeling. And what we found out was that they have happy feelings when there's good air quality and no noise. More data. And they're feeling irritated when the air quality is poor. We also show that as the average distance from the nearest construction increases, the happiness score increases. So as you move farther and farther away from the construction, you do feel a sense of happiness. And so these are some preliminary data that I'm sharing with you. We have 1 more year left, and we'll be excited to pull it all together. I have 1 more soapbox, and then I promise I'm done. Who knows what my soapbox is? Kitchen exhaust. If you talk to me, you will know I will always ask you, do you have a kitchen exhaust? And do you know if it vents outside? So you need to check if it vents outside, and if it does, you need to use it. Or if you don't, you know, it takes a while to figure out how to get one, and it's expensive. So open your windows or run an air cleaner. And I'm going to show you data from a colleague of mine in Boulder who retrofitted their house and on a Sunday morning burned pancakes. And when I saw this data, I said to her, what were you doing? And she said, yeah, we burned pancakes and the smoke just wouldn't dissipate. And she even turned on her kitchen exhaust fan, but I'm pretty sure it didn't vent outside. And she got upwards of 2,500 micrograms per cubic meter of particles in that house. And it stayed elevated for like 8 hours. They did leave the house to let it air out. But this is what can happen. And so this is why this is my soapbox. And it's really the #1 air pollution source in your house. Like, I love to cook, but you got to use that kitchen hood. All right, ending with some good news. The EPA is turbocharging the sale of electric trucks. That means I'm going to be out of a job, I hope, because most air pollution is combustion, right? I worked with the Lancet Commission to also tell our community what ventilation rates they should be using. Everyone has been afraid to do that for decades. And we're like, forget it, we're telling you. This is the ventilation rate you need in your building to keep yourself safe. And we hope that people start using it. And finally, in 2022, we had 40% female students in our freshman class in College of Engineering. So, good news. Good news. As I was preparing this talk, it was really interesting to reflect on many of my successes and some of my failures. And I began to see how one closed door led to a different open door, and that ultimately, though, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And so thank you to all of my collaborators. This is only a fraction of them, but they're the collaborators that I talked about, the projects today. All of these wonderful collaborators, and the students are in blue. They worked with me on all of the work I have talked about today. And I want to thank my family. I couldn't have done it without them. In a world where you can be anything, be kind.